So glad you chose to be here tonight. I've been excited about this. This is my first community class, but I'm looking forward to it and have been for a while, especially for this topic. This is a subject, a series in which I am very interested, and I hope you are as well. There is a lot of interesting facts about science and about this universe and all the things therein, and I really am going to enjoy this, and I hope that you will as well. And while enjoying it, I hope that you'll learn and that your faith will grow, and that you'll see the evidence as clearly as I believe that I do, and hopefully can make that clear to you as we survey it together. I want to, by way of introduction, kind of explain the format of the classes and what we're planning on doing here, and encourage you, of course, to plan on coming every opportunity that you have from one till the end. Now, if you miss a couple along the way, it's not going to be a setback as far as not being able to know what's going on. Each class is going to be individual, but they'll all be connected. And obviously, the best case scenario is for you to be here to all of them and putting all the evidence together. So you'll miss bits and pieces when you're not here, but you can still come in and after missing a class or two and jump right back into what we're talking about without too much confusion, I believe. I'm going to scoot up just a little bit so I feel closer to you guys. But again, I'm so glad that you're here. What we're going to be talking about, we've entitled it Reasons to Believe. We're going to be doing a series that's based on Christian evidences, apologetics, if you've heard that word, a defense. And our goal, our class goals are several. In fact, I've got them listed. I want you to see them by way of introducing this series. I have 5 goals that I hope to accomplish by the end of this 10-week period. Number 1, we want to prove that God does in fact exist. I'm talking about not only internally within the Bible, we'll use the Bible certainly throughout the series, but even outside of the Bible, based upon science, based on evidence, based on the laws of science and what they suggest, pillars and fundamentals. Because the fact is, true science, when I say true, that's because there's a lot of theoretical science that isn't true, that's not factual, and we'll certainly talk about the differences between the two. But true science and the Bible go hand in hand. And so we're going to use science and the Bible as well to prove the existence of God. Number 2, we want to disprove evolutionary theory. This mindset that evolution exists, or even that God uses evolution or theistic evolution. We want to take the time to disprove that as we go through this, because we'll see that true science and evolution do not go hand in hand, and that might be a surprise to many. We also want to prove the Bible's inspiration. Not only does God exist, not only is there a book, but this book we want to prove is different than any other book. And furthermore, that the God that we are talking about that exists is the author. He is the God of this book, the Bible. We certainly want to take time to prove that as well. Number 4, we want to prove Christ. We want to prove that Christ came to this world. Again, I'm not talking about just inside of the Bible, although that's part of it, but outside the Scriptures as well, evidences that show that Christ was here, that He was the Son of God, that He died, that He was resurrected, that His tomb could not be found, that it was empty, and that the men that taught in His name meant what they said, and they certainly did so very, very seriously and sincerely. And then number 5, we want to answer the arguments, the skeptics, the critics, and what they say to discredit what we're talking about, to argue that evolution does exist, to argue that man never had anything to do with dinosaurs, to argue that this Big Bang Theory really came into effect, that that's how this world came. We want to talk about all of those things, time permitting, and discredit them as we can. And so here's the class schedule. I want to give you an outline. If you want to jot it down, you may, or just take note. This is very tentative. I'm going to do my best to stick to this. But keep in mind, sometimes we might get caught up in a point and spend more time on it via discussion, which is great. I love discussion, and so we might not get to finish and have to pick up there next week or something to that effect. Something might come up that I had not planned on discussing that needs to be discussed. And so that class might change. If that happens, I'll let you know. But as of right now, we're on time, we're at the beginning, right? As of right now, here is the tentative schedule for the classes. Tonight, we'll talk about the cosmological argument. Next Tuesday night, we're going to talk about the teleological argument, that is the design. Very interesting class. I hope you can be here next week. We'll talk about the design that is in the universe, the design of the human body, design in animals, something that's very fascinating to me and I think will be of great benefit and interest to study. The next week, April 7th, we're going to look at the anthropological argument. And these 3 combined are more or less going to be the primary aspects of proving God's existence, our first goal. The anthropological argument is going to be about humanity, about morality, about ethics, about evil, pain, and suffering, those kinds of aspects of humanity, which is anthropology in general. April 14th, the next Tuesday, we'll talk about the inspiration of the Bible, how that we can see that this book is inspired and that the God that we are proving is the God of that book. And then we'll have to take a part two a second week and talk about some of these alleged contradictions or discrepancies. You know, the skeptics say that the Bible is not inspired because there's so many verses they claim that contradict one another. One verse says this, another says that, and if there's any passages, I'll admit, if there are any texts in the Bible that contradict one another, if there's any discrepancies, then the entirety of this book is discredited as being inspired, and I will admit that. But I think we'll find that these are just alleged and not truly Bible contradictions. Week 6, April 28th, we'll talk about the reality of Genesis 1 through 11. All right? The evolutionary theory really attacks the first 11 chapters of the Bible, the book of Genesis, the Noahic flood, the age of men, living as long as 969 years, this idea of a water canopy around the earth, the creation in 6 days, all of those things we want to talk about and study in class 6. Number 7, we'll delve into Christ, as we already mentioned, and try to tackle that in one class if we can. Class 8, we'll talk about dinosaurs and man, and class number 9, we'll take up the rest of the arguments. Anything that we feel like we've not covered that has to do with what the skeptics say, the critics say, the arguments, we'll do that. Any questions that come up that I say I don't know, and you may hear me say that several times, I'll write it down, I'll mark it down, and at that point in time, if not the night or the next week, we'll get to that on class 9. And so that's set aside for that reason. And then class 10, what it all means is what I would call that. Everything that we've studied, what's the next step? Once we hopefully come to a unanimous conclusion about these facts, how does that apply to me? What does this mean? What do I do next? How do I make this practical? And that's going to be the final class. All right, any questions or comments, thoughts so far about that? Pretty straightforward. Makes sense. That's our goal. We'll see what happens, but that's the plan. Now, these classes are going to be very simple. We'll come in and we'll jump right into it and get started each week. I won't introduce it every time. We'll just go right into class from now on. However, I do want to preface it by saying this. I'm going to bring in about 30 to 40 minutes of material each week. All right? This is not a class where I'm not going to try to make you sit here from 7 to 8 every single week for a full hour and not, 8 o'clock just means that is the absolute maximum time. I will not let us go over 8 o'clock. That being said, if we do make it that far because of discussion, all right, I'm allotting plenty of time for discussion. And if that happens and we get to 8 o'clock, now I apologize in advance, I'm going to have to cut it off at 8 o'clock because I want to respect your time. It's 8 o'clock's late enough as it is, and I want you to come and know that I will respect your time. And so chances are we'll be out of here before then, but if not, I won't keep you past then. Feel free to ask your questions and discuss and comment because, like I say, we have plenty of time for that, and I want to encourage that very much. If you don't say anything, we'll get out of here a lot earlier, true, but we may not learn as much. It may not be as beneficial, so don't even start to think that too much. Let's get into it tonight. The cosmological argument. What in the world does that mean? What is the cosmos? When we talk about the cosmos, what are we referencing? The universe, the cosmos, the whole thing, the entirety of the universe. Now, when we add logy, L-O-G-Y, to a word, what does that mean? Like biology, geology, study of, right, to study it. So we're doing cosmology. We're going to talk about the universe. In particular, more specifically, we want to talk about the origin of the universe. That's our class tonight. How in the world did this universe come into existence? That's really where it all begins, right? From the very beginning. How did it happen? Again, this is going to kind of introduce beginning to prove God's existence. I want you to think of this kind of like a court case. What we're doing, and we're going to meet 10 times, if you will, and you as the jury, and we're going together to survey the evidence. And I'm hoping that by the end of this, the jury will be unanimous that God does exist. We're proving, if you want to just get real symbolic with it, you could say that we are, or I am in a sense, the plaintiff here, and God, His name has been, let's say the atheistic community is being sued for defamation of the name of God. And so we're meeting together and we're going to prove that God does exist, and hopefully beyond a reasonable doubt, just like in a court case. And I hope that that's exactly what we'll do with this study. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. To begin with, we need to start, when we talk about the origin of the universe, with the law of causality. Now, we're going to have some science in a lot of these classes, and we're going to get into a little bit of the laws tonight, but for a very important reason. What in the world, if you remember science class, what in the world is the law of causality? Somebody tell us what that is, if you remember. Any science teachers? There you go, that's it. That's basically it. For every action, there is an equal and opposite what? Reaction. Or another way to put it is this idea of cause and effect. Those two entities, cause and effect, are one and the same. They are combined in every sense. They are the definition of one another. You cannot have cause without effect. You cannot have effect without cause. That is the law of causality. This is, and when I say a law, it's called that for a reason. It has never been rationally defied. No one has ever observed the law, or any of these laws that I'm going to mention, as not being accurate. There's no exception to these laws. It is accepted among the entire scientific community. The law of causality. If there's a cause, there's an effect. If there's an effect, there's a cause. It would be like saying, if we were to put it into a sentence, we could say a bachelor is an unmarried man. Okay? A bachelor is an unmarried man. Those two are one and the same, right? There's two different ways of saying the same thing. They are and go together. A triangle has three sides. All right? If it has three sides, it is a what? Triangle. If it's a triangle, it has what? Three sides. It is meaningless or pointless to say that it is three-sided and it is not a triangle. That's not accurate, right? That defies logic. It is analytically, by analysis, by observation, by logic, it's accurate 100% of the time. Cause and effect, all right? Now, also with this in mind, not only is there always going to be a preceding cause, but it also could be a simultaneous cause. And that's important because Stephen Hawking, which may be a name that's very familiar to you from Cambridge, back in 2011, he made a statement that much of the scientific community is buying into, that there can be no God, no creator, because the Big Bang Theory, there was no time before the Big Bang Theory. There was no cause to have an effect because there was no time for a cause. You only have the effect, right? Well, first of all, that defies what we've just talked about, the law of causality, cause and effect. But also the fact is you can have simultaneous cause and effect. That's very important. For example, if you were to sit down and make a lap, okay, at what point in the cause and the sitting down is the lap made? Is it after you sit down, then after that's finished, a lap is created? Or are you simultaneously creating a lap as you sit down? What do you think?
After you sit down.
Okay, some discrepancy there, right? Think about it this way. A person sits down, okay, completely is sitting down, and at that point there is no lap. It's not until after they've sat down that there is a lap. Is that true? No. All right, are you with me?
You know, you contradicted yourself then.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm getting at. They're simultaneously happening. When you're sitting down, you are at the same time creating the what? The lap. That's the idea. The point of that is God, now this is not how God did it, but just to talk about what the scientific community is saying, if there is this concept that there was no time before, there's no simultaneous cause and effect, well, that can be true, absolutely. Even as something as simple as sitting down and creating a lap is a simultaneous action, all right? Just something to think about. File that away in your mind. Also, though, with cause and effect, something else is very important, and that is that logically, the cause has to make sense with the effect. And what I mean by that is this. Let's say there's a book that falls off of a table. If I said to you that turning on the lights caused the book to fall off of the table, would that be logical? Would that be analytically true? Absolutely not, right? If I said to you that my arm bumped the book and that caused it to fall off the table, would that be true? Absolutely. So that's very important. In other words, science can't just make something up that's irrational. It has to be rational, it has to be logical, and it cannot violate the law of cause and effect. Now, why is that so important? Why did I just say all of that? Well, here's why. The universe is a what? Or is an what? It's an effect. It is an effect. So if the universe is an effect, it therefore, according to the law of causality, must have a what? Cause. So what's our question? what caused it. That's what we're getting at. That was just a very scientific, not very scientific, I'm not a master of science, but that was a slightly scientific way of explaining this law of causality. That's why this is important and why scientists use this phrase all the time. That's what they're talking about. So what caused it? We've got three options. Three options can be true. One of them is the only way in which the universe came to be. Number one, the universe is eternal. Option number one, the universe is eternal. That is, it has no beginning, it has no end, it has always existed. Okay? When you talk about cause and effect, right, we're talking about matter. We're talking about that which is tangible. When you think about something being eternal, does something eternal have a cause and an effect? No, there is no cause and effect with something that's eternal. If you think about God or whatever you want to call eternal, if something's always been and always will be, it wasn't caused, it wasn't an effect, it's eternal. So the universe would not violate that if it was eternal. No problems there, right? So that's a possibility, all right? And you'd be surprised how much time has been spent trying to prove that. Number two, the second option is the universe created itself from nothing. No, we'll get to that. We'll get to that, right? In other words, it just spontaneously generated. We'll talk about that in a minute when we get there, but it created itself from nothing. It's not eternal. It was created, but nothing created it. It just kind of happened, right? There was something there, and it popped into existence. Right? I'm not trying to make that sound foolish. It's just, that's what it is. That's what the tenet or point number two is. And then number three, the universe was created by something or someone else. And of course, that something or someone would have to be superior to the universe. It would have to be something that was eternal, that could create something, therefore, that wasn't. Based on, again, this law of causality and another law we'll get to in a moment. Let's start with, these are the three things we're going to talk about. Number one, is the universe eternal? All right, is the universe eternal? This is very interesting because the scientific community wanted for so long to prove that the universe was eternal. For years they've tried to prove it. Because if they did, then you don't have to worry about a God. You don't have to worry about an explanation. It's eternal. It's always been here. It always will be here. And we're done. Right? Okay, cool. Simple enough. The problem is, how are they proving, or how could they prove that the universe is eternal? Well, the evidence suggests the obvious. Robert Jastrow, who is a renowned scientist, an atheist, a skeptic, he wrote a book called God and the Astronomers. And here's something he said in this book. He says, the idea, and this is just an excerpt from page 31, but he says, the idea of a universe that has both a beginning and an end is distasteful to the scientific mind. That is, if the universe isn't eternal, that's distasteful to the scientific mind. In a desperate effort to avoid it, some astronomers have searched for another interpretation of the measurements that indicate the retreating motion of the galaxies, an interpretation that would not require the universe to expand. All right, we're going to get more into that in a moment, but that's what they're calling inflation. That this explosion happened and that the universe expanded into what it is, and it's continuing to expand. The problem with that is, if it's continuing to expand, it's not eternal, and therefore you have issues. So they're trying to disprove inflation. They're trying to say the universe isn't expanding so that they can say it's eternal. So he says, if the evidence for the expanding universe could be explained away, the need for a moment of creation would be eliminated. And the concept of time without end would return to science. Right? These creationists have taken that away from us, and we can have it back if the universe is eternal. There doesn't have to be a God in that sense. But these attempts, this is he himself saying this, these attempts have not succeeded. And most astronomers have come to the conclusion that they live in an exploding world. Right? They know very well, and today there is very, very, very few now, especially today, that believe in the universe being eternal. That's just not what science has proven. They believed that for a while. They wanted to prove it. They wanted it to be that way, but they know that that's just not the case. Even the scientific, the atheists, know that. And here's why. Number one, how do we know? Because of these two laws, two other laws of science. Very fundamental, again, pillars of science, true science. The first and second laws of thermodynamics. Right? Oh, you say this, all this science. This is important because this is what we're looking at it from a scientific perspective, outside of the Bible tonight. We're just looking at the science. Science gives us the first law of thermodynamics. Somebody tell us what that one suggests or means. I'm hearing lots of, not hearing it well enough to know what you're saying, but I'm hearing voices. Are they either in my head or you're saying it, one of the two. There you go. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, but it can be transitioned or transferred into another form or state. That's the first law of thermodynamics. You cannot create energy, you cannot destroy energy. All right? That's very important. Now, here's a little chart here, if you can see this, the energy balance. You've got the energy input, and basically every bit of the energy that is put in comes out on the other side. Now, it may change form, but it's all there. There's not any extra, and there's not any less. 100% of the energy that's put in is also in the output. Now, hold that thought, and let me illustrate this by this picture. Think about burning wood. Okay, you've got the wood, you've got the fire. Okay, there's energy here. There's energy happening. The energy is working, and that's what energy is, right? Working. And it's doing what it does. Now, what happens to that wood? Right, it burns up, and it turns into what? Turns into ash. What happens to the fire? Okay, it dies. It goes down. Now, it may look to our eyes as though the energy is being removed, but it's just being transitioned into another state. It's not lessening, as you might think, which brings us to the second law of thermodynamics. This was later discovered upon learning about this first law, and that is the second law of thermodynamics, which suggests what? While it is transferred and while there is an equal amount of energy, the output of energy is what? Okay, it's equal to the input, but it is, what defines this law as opposed to the first? The output of energy is less. Okay, it does change form, but it's less. Let me put it this way. What can you do with that block of wood, or those stacks of logs that have been burned up? What can you use those for now? Okay, you got charcoal. You're going to have to find another use for them. You can't reburn them and do it all over again. The second law of thermodynamics says that that energy is less usable. It's less usable, which is very, very important when we talk about the universe attempting to be eternal, or this claim. You notice, again, I know that's very small, and if you decide in the future weeks to sit a little closer, it'll be a little bigger, but since you're so far back, it's kind of small, but less usable. If you see that little squiggly line, that's less usable energy output, okay? It's there, and what happens to the fire? The fire looks like it disappears, but all the energy is there, but what happened to it? Where did it go? It transformed. It just turned into what? Yeah, smoke, vapor. That's right, went up the chimney and left, didn't it? Now, how are you going to use that vapor and smoke, that heat that you created? How do you use that? How do you recycle that and make it, it's very difficult. You can't really do that, right? And so you're losing energy. Now, here's why this is so important. What do you hear all the time about energy? What do you see being advertised everywhere? And what are we talking about when it comes to energy? What's the verb in front of it? We want to what energy? Conserve. We want clean energy. We want to conserve energy. We want to hold on to it. Now, why is that important? Why do we need to conserve energy? Because if we don't, we'll run out. Now, why is that important when it comes to the eternality of the universe?
Because if you run out, it ain't eternal.
That's it. If energy is running out, if we're gaining less of it or have less of it, that means it's not eternal. Matter. It is being lessened. All the energy is still there, but it's in an unusable form. If we were talking about an eternal universe, right? First of all, let's say it never had a beginning, it's always been there. And you still wanted to argue that this law is true, and it is, the second law of thermodynamics. If the universe had always been here, where would we be right now as far as energy is concerned? Well, if it was everlasting, that's true, but forget the everlasting for a minute. Let's say that the universe did not have a beginning, as they want to imply here, but that the second law of thermodynamics was true. What would happen? Where would we be right now as far as energy is concerned? If it was eternal, in other words, if it never had a beginning, all the energy would already be used up. That's what I'm getting at, because it's been being used for so long. If the second law of thermodynamics is true, and it absolutely is. But we're talking about no beginning and no end, of course. And I see some of your faces, you're like, that was very confusing. But let's go back to what makes more sense, the eternality, no beginning and no end. There's a major problem because this law is absolutely true. You get that ash, you get that heat, and it's still there, but it's not usable like it was. And so we're all about conserving this energy. So is the universe eternal? This is just one of many reasons why it's not, because the very laws of science defy it. You cannot defy the first and second law of thermodynamics. It's never been done and certainly won't be. That's why it's a law. Jastrow went on to say, the lingering decline predicted by astronomers for the end of the world differs from the explosive conditions they have calculated for its birth, but the impact is the same. Modern science denies an eternal existence of the universe either in the past or in the future. The fact is, modern science, he himself says, defies the opportunity, the implication that the universe could be eternal, right? Now, there's not very much debate on this. It's pretty, even the scientific community, the atheistic community, for the most part, has to agree. There's no debate on that. The universe is not eternal, which brings us to our other two options. Either the universe created itself from nothing, or there is a creator that created the universe. Which do most of the scientific community, I dare say, which of those two do they believe in? Yeah, the second one. They believe that the universe created itself from nothing. Let's talk about that. And you know, I laugh a little bit too when we say this, and no disrespect to those who believe it, but why is it almost humorous to suggest that the universe just came from nowhere? Why is that trouble so hard for the scientists? Why are they struggling even themselves with this particular theory? And it's still a theory.
Well, they don't think like normal people.
Because they don't think. Well, Jim? Yes. Their very laws of biogenesis, which we're going to get to in a minute, you have to have something in order to get something. Something doesn't come from nothing. That's just not how it works.
All of the evidence contradicts that. Everything that we know in any experience, even manufacturing, you know, things just don't, you know, come about without being manufactured.
Right, exactly.
It just defies any sort of common sense. You know, I know we're not talking about common sense, right?
Yes. It does. Rationale, logic, it just kind of defies that in our minds. But if you don't believe in a creator, this is the only other what? The only other option, right? It's funny, and by the way, if I have a lot of resources and blessed to have a lot of resources to get this material, a lot of it coming from Apologetics Press, if you're familiar with that company. There's a lot of good material, and certainly some of the things you see here and ideas, principles are coming from their material, which I use so well. And I completely just forgot where I was going with that. That was leading into something, and it just left me. Maybe it'll come back in a minute, but let's get into this. Number two, but nonetheless, Apologetics Press, if you want to continue this study, that is a great place to use, and I'm sure there are many others that we could mention. Basically, this is the idea of spontaneous generation. That is that something comes from nothing. It just spontaneously came. There was nothing there, and all of a sudden it was there. And you see that there's no energy input, there's no cause, there's just an effect. And so this defies, obviously, all the laws that we just talked about. But let's look at it nonetheless. Let's consider this. Is there a possibility that this life came from non-life? Now, the most popular way that they explain this is the what theory? The Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang Theory. There's even a television show called that now. I've never seen it, but I don't know if it's about this or not, but this is a very popular, this is the most common idea that the universe came about by this explosion. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. This is what they're suggesting. Some 14 billion years ago, there was a dot, smaller than the period at the end of a sentence, and it got so hot that it exploded, and in less than a millisecond, the 14 billion light year sized universe existed. That's what they're calling inflation now. In less than a millisecond, boom, it went out over a span of 14 billion light years. Now, does anybody know how far a light year is? As far as space goes, looking this up, it is approximately 6 trillion miles, 1 light year. Okay, listen to me. 1 light year is 6 trillion miles. Now we're talking about the universe is 14 billion light years. I can't even, you do the math because I'm not even going to try. That's one of those where you do it, you got a 10 times and you got a bunch of zeros way out there, a number that, who would even know how to say that? That's huge. And so they claim that existed, that happened within less than a millisecond of an explosion from a period. Now, there's a couple of questions that obviously arise that they're unable to answer. Number one, where did that period come from? Right? The universe didn't come from nothing. It came from a small period of mass that exploded. Well, where did that little bit of matter, that little small period that got so hot, where did that come from? Well, and what they do now is you hear words like black hole, you hear words like dark matter, and when you hear things like that, basically what that is, I heard Dr. Houts from NASA was speaking on this several years ago, and he said basically, and he knows way more about this than I could ever dream of, scientifically speaking, and all the big words. But anyways, I just say that to say it's interesting to hear him talk about it. But he says when you hear those mysterious words like dark matter and black hole, he said all that is their giant question mark. They don't have any idea. They can't explain it, and so they make up these words and say that that's what happened. And that pretty much covers it. They've never seen a black hole. They don't even know if such a thing exists. You've never seen dark matter. They don't even know if it exists. You can't see it. But it had to, right, in order for all this to happen. That's how they explain how this universe came into existence. And it is very interesting. We'll just put it that way. Michael Brooks wrote a journal called The New Scientist. This was several years ago. But he said inflation is arguably the most important theoretical idea in cosmology since the Big Bang. Inflationary theory has suggested that the major problems in cosmology could be solved if the universe had blown up like a balloon, inflating faster than the speed of light in the moments after its birth. Right? This is a very, very critical aspect of the universe, this inflation, this Big Bang theory. But then he went on to say this. I believe this was in 2003, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in that vicinity. But he said it's starting to look a little vulnerable. The theory seems to have failed. Now, why? I put that in there. That's me, by the way. Why? That's our question. He goes on to say, why? There is the lack of any solid scientific idea for why or how inflation might have happened. In other words, we've never seen it. We have no evidence of it. We really don't know anything about it. But we've thrown it out there and said that that's it. Second, satellite measurements of the cosmic microwave background radiation seem to contradict the predictions of inflation. Now, you know as much about that as I do, but what he's saying in essence is what we have tried to do to even come close to copying it didn't work. The theory seems to have failed, he says. Atheists' best theory of the early universe is starting to look a tad insecure. That's he himself. Now, spontaneous generation, this idea that something comes from nothing, has been disproven time and time again. I want to show you a few of those that I think are very important. The first time, at least historically speaking, the first major time this was disproved was in the 17th century by a man by the name of Francesco Redi. And Redi wanted to disprove spontaneous generation. He just didn't believe that this was possible. And so he did an experiment. Does anybody know what he did? You probably do or will recognize it when I put it up here. He took some jars, like what we would call a mason jar, and he put some meat in those jars. Because what people believed was that these maggots were spontaneously being generated on this meat. As it rotted and it ruined raw meat, these maggots would appear. And they seemed to have came from nowhere. And so he argued that they were spontaneously being generated. And so he did this procedure, this experiment. He took 30 mason jars, he put raw meat in each of them. One of them he left completely exposed and open. The other he put a gauze cover over, and the third he put a parchment over, completely covered it up. And his theory was that these flies were coming in, because that's what these maggots were, of course, is flies. He believed flies were coming in and just laying eggs that were so small the human eye couldn't see them, and these eggs were hatching and maggots were being, I know that's gross, but this is what he did. And this is how he proved or disproved it in this case. And so he set this up, and as you can kind of see pictured here, what happened? The open section there, the flies came in, they laid their eggs, and the maggots came. Now, he didn't see that personally, he didn't know, but then you see what happened in the next two. As pictured there, the gauze experiment, the flies could not get to the meat, and so they laid their eggs up. They could, they still had, I guess, for whatever reason, it still attracted them through the gauze. And they laid their eggs on top of the gauze, and there were maggots on the gauze, but none were on the meat. What do you think happened to the one that was completely sealed? Nothing was there. There was no, it was just rotted meat. No change whatsoever because the flies were not able to get to it. So what did this disprove? It disproved that something could just spontaneously generate, that life could come from non-life. However, there was some, as you can imagine, some arguments against this. There were those who didn't believe him. In fact, there was a man by the name of John Needham who not many years later said that he could disprove it. He could prove, I should say, that spontaneous generation happened. And he took some flasks, he boiled them, he claimed to boil them so that all the bacteria and such would be out of them. He claimed to have sealed one and left the other open, and that both of them were teeming, in his words, with microorganisms, microorganisms with bacteria and such. And so, obviously, life came from non-life. So, now nobody saw that happen, that's just what he claimed. Well, Lazzaro Spallanzani, I hope I'm saying that correctly, in the 18th century, when he heard about this, said, I want to test this for myself. And of course, he made this public, and it was documented. And so he did the experiment. He took the flasks, and he boiled them so that all of the living entities, any bacteria, anything that was in there was gotten rid of, was boiled out. Then he took those flasks, he corked one, sealed it off, and the other he left open. He let that sit for a while, and over time, the one that was open was teeming with microorganisms. The one that was sealed had none. Once again, this was disproven. However, the scientific community still says at this point it was not officially disproven because the argument came to be this. Well, you've got to have air. That's the reason you don't have spontaneous generation, because there's no oxygen. You've got to have oxygen for that to happen. Thus enters Louis Pasteur. I know you know that name. Pasteurization, right? Louis Pasteur in the 19th century officially disproved spontaneous generation. And so his name, of course, will forever be remembered. He did something a little different. He took the flasks, and very, very creative mind, he had the flask come out to a bit of an S, to where it was very difficult for anything to get in, like a fly or such. In fact, he put a little filter in the S area so no dust or anything could get in, but oxygen was there. And so he did this, very interesting to me, because he took this nutrient-filled broth, okay? I mean, he took an extreme here. He boiled it out, and he let it sit like this for a year, 365 days, and there was not a single microorganism, nothing living whatsoever in that for over or up to a full year. Then he took that S and he broke it off and let it sit for a few days, and what happened? It began to have microorganisms. It began to have life. And so he officially disproved. Nobody could argue against that one. Oxygen was there, and finally it was accepted that spontaneous generation cannot be proven. And to today, March 24, 2015, spontaneous generation has never been witnessed. It has not been proven. And yet, this theory, and by the way, a theory, what is factual about a theory? In order for it to even be a theory, it must be what? Provable, exactly, provable. It must be testable. It must be observable for it to be a theory. And so ultimately, really, we don't even have much of a theory here because it's never even been observed. You can't even test it anymore. It's just been completely disproven. And yet, there are people everywhere in this world believing that life can come from non-life, or at least in this one instance, that it happened. The laws of science apply unless it has to do with a worldview. I mean, that literally seems to be the case, and I mean that with all respect. Did the universe create itself? Absolutely not. There is not. It is absolutely improbable. It is impossible. It defies true science. Not even talking about the Bible. It defies true science completely to suggest that this explosion happened. And I could have took the time. I thought about talking about the probability. I just didn't do it. But if you want to, get on there and do some research about the probability of this actually happening. I mean, there's a higher chance that you're going to walk down the street and a bomb's going to go off and a house is going to be built. You're going to have a way better chance that that's going to happen than for a period to explode in the universe to be created. And we'll see that even more next week when we look at the design, right? I'll never forget, there was a gentleman that did a Bible class for youth, and he was talking about this, and he took a cell phone. I guess it was not very expensive, I don't know, but he took a cell phone and he broke it up, and he put it in a box, and he had a firecracker. This isn't an auditorium at a building, not this one, and he took a firecracker and threw it in there and shut the cover, and that thing just lit up, you know, and made all the noise. And then he said, you would expect that I could open this up, and there's a chance that it would have recreated this phone to its full. I mean, all the components are even there, right? But do you think he pulled that out and the phone was rebuilt? No, that's not going to happen. Nobody really would think that an explosion would build a house or an explosion would build a computer or a phone, and yet that is so much more probable, so much more, 10 times a huge number more probable than the possibility that the universe came into existence based on a small period that exploded very largely. You get the idea. And so we're forced to the final option. Number 3, was the universe created? If the other two are not true, it seems that this would have to be the fact. This would have to be the, what am I looking for here? This would have to be the accurate conclusion, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Let's look at some statements here that I believe theoretically to be true and factual. Some observations, some logical conclusions. Number 1, the universe is not eternal. Now, by way of review, how did we decide tonight? Just on a small scale, there's many more reasons, but tonight, how did we conclude that the universe is not eternal? Because it defies the law of what? Thermodynamics. Excellent. Thermodynamics. We've concluded that the universe is not eternal. On a small scale, we've concluded that in a short amount of time, I know. The universe, number 2, did not create itself. We just talked about spontaneous generation and the implications therein. Therefore, the universe must have been created by something or someone superior to itself. Now, we're not even to the point as to yet to say that it's God and it's the God of the Bible. We're being open-minded here, just stating facts. Apparently, the universe was created by something or someone that is superior to itself. Let me put it this way. Number 1, everything is either mind or matter. We talked a little about that. You've got matter, which is decaying and that, and then you've got mind. And you've heard people say mind over matter and those kinds of things. But you've got 2 classifications here, and there is no alternative. Again, this is just a fundamental accepted idea. It's either mind or matter. Something exists now, think about this, so something eternal exists. How can we conclude that? Based on what we just saw in that evidence. Something exists now, therefore something eternal must exist. Why?
Cause and effect.
Okay, good. Cause and effect for one. Because if something exists, there has been a what? A beginning. There's been an effect, and in order, we've already talked about that law of causality. If there's an effect, there must be a what? Don't make me start over. If there's an effect, there must be a what? Cause. You know it. You know it. Y'all are getting tired on me, aren't you? Cause. There's a cause and effect. And so something exists now, so something eternal had to exist. Why else, though? What else did we talk about that could help us form that conclusion with this statement? Exactly. Exactly. There's no spontaneous generation. Something doesn't just come from nothing. And so if something is here, then something created it. Because there was something before. If something's here now, and if there was something before, then there was something before. Eventually, you have to come to the conclusion that there's some eternal entity somewhere. If it's not the universe, and we know that it's not by the very laws of science, then there must be something out there that is eternal. And that, therefore, created this world. Therefore, either mind or matter is eternal. Matter is not eternal. We've just proven that. And so, mind must be eternal. Here's another way of putting it. Everything that exists is either dependent or independent. We know and understand what that means. If the universe is not eternal, it is dependent, not independent. What's wrong with me? If the universe is not eternal, it is dependent. I apologize. Should say dependent. The universe is not eternal, therefore the universe is dependent. At least I got it right there. Number 5, so it must have been made by something that is independent. Are you with me? This is just a couple of ways of saying the same thing. I'm just hoping that it sinks in and that it makes sense to you. Therefore, the universe was made by something eternal. All right, we're just using some logic, some reasoning based upon these laws of science. All right, let's get to the conclusion here. A couple of questions for discussion. Now, we've got just a few minutes left, and I don't want to keep you here any longer than I promised I would. So, very quickly, what are the options to explain the origin of the universe and which is most plausible? I want to make sure we go here remembering some of these things before next week. What are the 3 options for the explanation as to how the universe began. It's always existed. It's eternal. Someone else.
Created out of nothing.
Created out of nothing? Or number 3. Is that what you're going to say? Had to be created. That's right. Had to be created by something or someone else superior to itself. Which of the 3 would we conclude, based on this study tonight? Certainly there's much more evidence to survey, but based on the study tonight, which seems to be the most plausible? Based on the laws of science, that it was created, right? I'm not just saying that because I'm a preacher and that's what I'm supposed to say. We're talking about the very laws of science here, even outside of the Bible. Does a creator defy the law of causality? Something to think about.
No.
No. Excellent. Why not?
Because, well, go ahead, somebody else.
Yeah, somebody said it, I think. Okay, good. He is. He's the cause and the effect. He's eternal. If there's something that's eternal, there is no cause and effect. Causality happens within matter. We're talking about, but when it comes to mind, there is no cause and effect. The Creator, something that is, again, that's why if the universe was eternal, there would be no issue. But it's not eternal, and so the law of causality does apply. What problems does a non-eternal universe cause for evolutionary theory? What problems does a non-eternal universe cause for evolutionary theory? Why did Robert Jastrow, we talked about earlier, why did he say it was so difficult for them to accept that the universe is not eternal? Why does it cause problems? I'm sorry? Okay, good. Yeah, energy is being used up, right? And so they know it's not eternal. And therefore, that causes some problems with them explaining that the universe exists without a creator. Why is that? Again, this is just review. Why is that?
They don't know what created it.
Yeah, they don't. Yeah, they have to say that it just came from nothing, because the only other option is that a creator made it. Very simple. Number 4, can one logically conclude that there was a time when absolutely nothing existed? Can you logically conclude, today being here in the flesh, that there was a time in which absolutely nothing existed? Can you logically conclude that? No, absolutely not. Because if there was a time when there was nothing, what would be today? Nothing. Because you can't get something from nothing. You just can't do it. And so that's right, zero, goose egg. There's nothing. You can't say this idea that there was a black hole and you've got this insane gravity and insane volume that time would stop and all of that. I mean, it's incredible the way the heights and depths they go to explain this stuff. What are some problems with this assertion? That's basically what we were just talking about. Number 5, how does the very existence of the universe cause evidence for the existence of a creator?
Because the universe is in effect, and it must have required a cause. And so we don't have any other evidence. We don't, and I know we're not getting into the Bible yet, but we don't have any evidence of material causing material.
Exactly. Absolutely. Again, this is all just review. You know, the more we repeat it, the more we think about it, the more we'll remember it. And so for tonight, that is our study, the cosmological. We're talking about the cosmos, the options, the plausibility, and the fact that the origin of the universe, it's not eternal. The universe isn't eternal because of the laws of causality and the first and second law of thermodynamics. And certainly the Big Bang Theory is not plausible because it defies those very laws and the law of biogenesis. That is, by the way, how the law of biogenesis came. After Louis Pasteur did that, they began to call it the law of biogenesis. Again, law because it's never been rationally disproved. And the law of biogenesis is bio-life, Genesis beginning, the beginning of life. Life cannot come from non-life. It can only come, furthermore, after its own what? Kind. We'll get to that, but that's the law of biogenesis. And so we must conclude, therefore, that the universe was created by something or someone superior to itself. Any last-minute questions or concerns or thoughts? Yes, sir.
You talk about the speck that exploded.
Yes.
You know that it's easy to just race past that, but that, of course, had to be an aspect of matter.
Mm-hmm.
If it exploded, I mean, it has to be matter, and no matter how small it is, it's still matter.
Right.
And so, you know, it has to have had some properties to be whatever it is.
Exactly,
However
yes.
infinitesimal it is, it still matter because we know the universe is constituted of all matter.
Exactly.
It's stuff, you know, it's material, it's matter.
That's
all
right.
of it, stars, earth, everything.
Yeah. Like you said, that period, however small it is for the audio, it's matter. Even that little period before that Big Bang is matter, and it has the same properties.
Like singularity or something like that.
Yes.
At one point.
Yes.
I remember that term.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Associated with that.
Yep.
Time.
Singularity, that's exactly right. Yes, sir.
One thing that's interesting to me is even if you could believe that it did spring from that,
Yes.
you also have to believe that all the laws that govern the entire universe also just spontaneously came about.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
Because the universe is very ordered.
Yep.
You know, I was reading in books that's talking about this, that if the earth, there's so many things that have to be so exact
Yes.
for life.
Yes. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. Yes. The design, it's so orderly. How could that have just happened? Absolutely. Exactly. And like he said, he was mentioning that to believe in that Big Bang, to believe that it all just happened, you've also got to believe that it spontaneously generated these laws as well, the laws of science. And that's exactly right. It's a good way of putting it.
And you know, if you ever talk to an atheist, you have to tell them that, you know, you say you don't have faith, that's impossible, because you have to have more faith to believe in the
Exactly.
than you do to believe in God.
You're exactly right. It does. It takes more faith. It really does. It takes more faith to be an atheist. And again, these are theories. They're not facts. And so there's a lot of faith involved in that which is unseen. It's incredible. I have a book in the office. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And there's a lot of, and again, it's not to be disrespectful, but it takes a lot of faith to be an atheist too, even more than it does to believe in God. So great points. I appreciate so much your time tonight and being here. Next week, we're going to jump right into a topic that I hope will be of very much benefit as we talk about design. Very interesting. I hope you'll come and learn more about this universe as we really begin to see how big and wonderful this universe is and how orderly and how designed it is. And certainly design demands a what? Designer, that's right. It does. Thank y'all so much for your kind attention and hope that you have a safe journey home, and we'll be back with us next opportunity that you have.